I used to work as a building maintenance supervisor for a large apartment complex in Chicago. It was a decent job, decent pay, and most days were pretty routine. Fix a leaky faucet, replace a light fixture, deal with noise complaints. Nothing too complicated. The building was old, built in the 70s, 8 floors with about 120 units. We had a small maintenance office in the basement, and during weekdays there were usually 3 or 4 of us on staff. But on weekends and nights, it was just me and one other guy rotating shifts. What happened last November made me quit that job. I gave my 2 weeks' notice the very next day, and I've never gone back to that building since. It was a Saturday night, around 9. I was working the late shift, which meant I'd be there until 6 in the morning. The other maintenance guy had called in sick, so I was alone. That wasn't unusual, it happened maybe once or twice a month. I was sitting in the office, watching something on my phone, when I got a maintenance request through the building's app. Unit 714 was reporting a leak in their bathroom. Water coming through the ceiling from the unit above. I grabbed my toolkit and headed up. The elevator was slow, and I remember being annoyed because I'd just settled in for what I thought would be a quiet night. When I got to the 7th floor, I knocked on the door of 714. A woman in her 30s answered. She looked stressed, said water had started dripping through her bathroom ceiling about an hour ago. She'd tried calling the unit above her, 814, but no one answered. I told her I'd check it out and went up to the 8th floor. I knocked on 814, no answer. I knocked again, louder, still nothing. I used my master key to open the door. The apartment was dark, and it smelled stale, like no one had been there in a while. I called out, said I was maintenance, and needed to check the bathroom. No response. I found the bathroom. The sink was running, water overflowing onto the floor. It had been running for a while. There was at least an inch of water covering the entire bathroom floor, seeping out into the hallway. I shut off the water and started mopping up what I could. That's when I noticed something weird. There were wet footprints leading out of the bathroom, down the hallway, toward one of the bedrooms. But they weren't normal footprints. They were smeared, like someone had been dragging their feet. I followed the footprints to the bedroom. The door was closed. I knocked and called out again. No answer. I opened the door. The room was dark, except for a little light coming in from the street outside. I could see a bed, unmade, and a dresser, and sitting in the corner, in a chair, was a person. They were just sitting there, completely still, facing the wall. I couldn't see their face, just the back of their head and their shoulders. I said hello, asked if they were okay. No response. They didn't move at all. My heart started pounding. Something felt very wrong. I turned on the light. The person in the chair was wearing a bathrobe, soaking wet. Their hair was dripping water onto the floor, but they still didn't move. They just sat there, facing the corner. I stepped closer and said I was building maintenance, that I needed to make sure everything was okay. Still no response. I walked around to see their face. That's when I realized it wasn't a person. It was a mannequin, a store mannequin, dressed in a wet bathrobe, positioned in the chair to look like someone sitting there. I felt a wave of relief followed immediately by confusion. Why would someone do this? Why would they leave their sink running, flood their bathroom, and set up a mannequin in their bedroom? Then I heard something behind me. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I spun around. The apartment door, which I'd left open, was now closed, and standing in the bedroom doorway was a man. He was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing jeans and a dark hoodie. His face was partially hidden by the hood, but I could see his eyes. They were fixed on me, unblinking. He didn't say anything, just stood there, blocking the only exit from the bedroom. I asked him if this was his apartment. He didn't answer. He just took a step forward. I backed up until I hit the wall. My mind was racing. I had my phone in my pocket, but I knew if I reached for it, he might rush me. The window was behind me, but I was on the 8th floor. No way out. He took another step forward. Then he spoke, his voice low and calm. He said I shouldn't have come in, that this wasn't my business. I told him I was just responding to a maintenance request, that the unit below was flooding. He said he knew. He'd called it in himself. My blood went cold. He'd made the request. He'd set this up deliberately. The flooding, the mannequin, all of it was to get someone up here. He asked me if I was alone. if anyone knew I was up here. I lied and said my supervisor was downstairs, that he'd come looking for me if I didn't check in. The man smiled. He said he'd been watching the building for weeks. He knew there was only one maintenance person on duty at night. He knew I was alone. He took another step forward, close enough now that I could see his face clearly. He looked normal, unremarkable. That's what scared me the most. He looked like someone you'd pass on the street and not think twice about. He reached into his pocket and pulled something out. A roll of duct tape. That's when I acted. I grabbed the lamp from the nightstand and swung it at him as hard as I could. It hit him in the shoulder, and he stumbled back, surprised. I didn't wait. I shoved past him and ran. I made it to the apartment door and yanked it open. I could hear him behind me, recovering, starting to chase. I ran down the hallway to the stairs, didn't trust the elevator, and took them 2 at a time. I could hear his footsteps above me, echoing in the stairwell. He was faster than me, gaining ground. By the time I hit the 6th floor, he was only 1 floor behind. I burst out of the stairwell on the 5th floor and pounded on the first door I saw. An older man answered, startled. I pushed past him, told him to lock the door and call 911. I told him someone was chasing me, that he was dangerous. The man locked the door and called the police while I stood there, shaking, trying to catch my breath. We heard footsteps in the hallway, passing by the door, then silence. The police arrived within 10 minutes. I told them everything: the maintenance request, the flooded apartment, the mannequin, the man who'd trapped me. They searched the building, went up to Unit 814, but found nothing. The apartment was empty. No man, no mannequin, no evidence anyone had been there except the flooded bathroom. They checked the building's security cameras. The lobby camera showed me entering the building for my shift, but there was no footage of anyone else entering or leaving around that time. The 8th floor had no cameras in the hallways. The police took my statement and said they'd investigate, but I could tell they were skeptical. Without any physical evidence or security footage, there wasn't much they could do. I found out later that Unit 814 had been vacant for 3 weeks. The previous tenant had moved out, and the unit hadn't been re-rented yet. Somehow, this guy had gotten access to a vacant apartment and set up his trap. The building management changed all the locks on vacant units after that. They also installed more security cameras, but the damage was done for me. I couldn't go back to working there, especially not alone at night. I think about it sometimes, about what would have happened if I hadn't grabbed that lamp, about what he was planning to do with that duct tape, about the fact that he'd been watching the building, learning the patterns, waiting for the right moment. And I think about the maintenance request, how easy it was to submit one through the app, how it brought me right to him, alone, with no one knowing exactly where I was. I work in building maintenance at a different complex now. Smaller building, better security, and I never work nights alone anymore, but I still get anxious every time I get a late night maintenance request. And I always tell someone exactly where I'm going before I respond to a call, because I learned that the most dangerous thing isn't a broken pipe or a faulty wire. It's the person who knows how to use the system against you, the person who knows you'll come when called, because it's your job, and the person who's patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to strike. My wife and I moved into our first house 3 years ago. It was a small 2-bedroom place in a quiet suburb outside of Portland. The price was good, the neighborhood seemed safe, and the inspection didn't turn up any major issues. We thought we'd found the perfect starter home. We moved in on a Saturday in March. The previous owner had cleared out completely, or so we thought. The house was empty except for some basic fixtures and a few things left in the garage. The first week was normal. We unpacked, arranged furniture, started making the place feel like ours. Then, on our 8th night there, something strange happened. I woke up around 2 in the morning to use the bathroom. When I came back to bed, I noticed something on my nightstand that hadn't been there before. A small glass of water, about half full, sitting right next to my phone. I hadn't put it there. My wife was asleep next to me. I thought maybe I'd gotten the water earlier and forgotten about it, even though I had no memory of doing so. I shrugged it off and went back to sleep. The next morning, I mentioned it to my wife. She looked at me strangely and said she'd found something weird too. A kitchen towel had been moved from the drawer to the counter overnight. She'd specifically put it away before bed, but when she woke up, it was folded neatly on the counter. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe we were both just forgetful, still adjusting to the new house. But then it happened again. 2 nights later, I woke up and found my shoes moved. I always leave them by the bedroom door, but they'd been placed neatly at the foot of the bed, side by side, laces tucked in. My wife found her coffee mug moved from the kitchen sink to the dining table. Then a book she'd left on the couch appeared on a shelf. Each time, these items were moved during the night while we were sleeping. We started staying up later, trying to catch whatever was happening. We even set up my phone to record the living room overnight. But nothing showed up on the footage. Just empty rooms, no movement, no explanation. Then one night, about 3 weeks after we'd moved in, I heard something, a sound that woke me from deep sleep. It was coming from downstairs, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking gently on wood. I grabbed my phone and went downstairs quietly. The sound was coming from the basement door. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. I opened the basement door and turned on the light. The tapping stopped immediately. I went down the stairs slowly, looking around. The basement was unfinished, just concrete floors and walls. Some shelving units we'd set up, boxes of our things. Nothing looked out of place. I checked behind the furnace, in the corners, everywhere. Nothing. I went back upstairs and locked the basement door. I told my wife what I'd heard, but she was half asleep and just mumbled something about old houses making weird noises. The next day, I decided to explore the basement more thoroughly during daylight. That's when I found it. Behind one of the shelving units, there was a small door built into the wall. It was only about 3 feet tall, painted the same color as the concrete, easy to miss. I'd never noticed it before. I moved the shelving unit aside and tried the door. It was locked, but the lock looked old and simple. I found a screwdriver and managed to pop it open. Behind the door was a crawl space, maybe 4 feet high, and extending back about 10 feet. It was dark and dusty, with exposed insulation and old pipes. But what caught my attention was what was inside. There were items stored in there: a sleeping bag, a pillow, some bottles of water, and snack wrappers, a flashlight, a small battery-powered radio, and a notebook. My hands were shaking as I opened the notebook. The pages were filled with handwriting, dated entries going back months. The entries were observations, notes about the house and its occupants. The early entries were about the previous owner, a single man who'd lived there before us. They described his routine in disturbing detail: what time he left for work, when he came home, what he ate for dinner, when he went to bed. Then the entries changed. They mentioned the man selling the house and moving out, and then they mentioned us, our names, our moving date, descriptions of our furniture, our belongings, our habits. The most recent entry was from 2 days ago. It described my wife's morning routine, what she'd worn to work, what time she'd left the house. Someone had been living in our crawl space, watching us, taking notes about us, moving our things while we slept. I dropped the notebook and backed out of the crawl space. I called the police immediately.
911,
When they arrived, they searched the entire house and the crawl space. They found everything I'd described. They also found evidence that someone had been coming and going through a small window well on the side of the house that we'd never checked. It was hidden by bushes, easy to access from outside without being seen. The police took the notebook and the items as evidence. They dusted for fingerprints. They told us to change our locks and install a security system. They also told us something that made my blood run cold. They said situations like this were more common than people realized. Squatters who hide in houses, sometimes for months or even years, living in crawl spaces, attics, or basements. Emerging when the homeowners are asleep or away, using their facilities, taking their food, watching their lives. We couldn't stay in that house. Even with new locks, even with a security system, we couldn't sleep knowing someone had been there, watching us, living right under our feet. We put the house on the market and moved out within a month. The police never found who it was. The fingerprints didn't match anyone in the system. The notebook handwriting was analyzed but provided no leads. Whoever had been living in our crawl space vanished completely once they knew they'd been discovered. We live in an apartment now, on the 4th floor of a modern building. No basements, no crawl spaces, no hidden areas. But I still check every closet, every cabinet, every space large enough for a person to hide, and I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, listening for sounds that shouldn't be there. Because I know now that your home isn't always as private as you think, that walls can hide more than pipes and wiring. And that sometimes, the thing you should fear most isn't breaking into your house from outside, it's already inside, and it's been there all along. I drive trucks for a living, long haul, cross-country routes, usually alone. I've been doing it for about 12 years now, and I've seen a lot in that time. Strange people, weird situations, places that feel wrong, even in broad daylight. But what happened on Western Texas last year is something I'll never forget. It's the reason I don't stop at isolated rest stops anymore, no matter how tired I am or how badly I need a break. It was late August, around 11 at night. I'd been driving since 6 that morning, hauling a load from California to North Carolina. I was exhausted, fighting to keep my eyes open. I needed coffee, needed to stretch my legs, needed to use a bathroom. I saw a sign for a rest stop coming up in 5 miles. I'd never stopped there before, but I'd passed it dozens of times over the years. It was one of those small, basic rest stops, just a bathroom building, a few parking spots, and some picnic tables. No gas station, no food, nothing fancy. I pulled off the highway and into the rest stop. There was only one other vehicle there, a white van parked on the far side of the lot, away from the lights. The bathroom building was lit up, and I could see it was one of those older cinder block structures, probably built in the 70s. I parked my truck, grabbed my phone, and walked toward the bathroom. The night was quiet, except for the distant sound of traffic on the highway. No wind, no animals, just that empty desert silence. I went into the men's room. It was exactly what you'd expect: old, slightly run down, but clean enough. 3 stalls, 2 urinals, a couple of sinks, fluorescent lights humming overhead. I was washing my hands when I heard the door open behind me. I glanced in the mirror and saw a man walk in. He was tall, maybe 40 years old, wearing dirty jeans and a flannel shirt. He didn't look at me, just walked past and went into one of the stalls. I dried my hands and left. As I walked back to my truck, I noticed the white van was still there, but I didn't see anyone around it. I figured the guy in the bathroom must have been the driver. I got in my truck, started the engine, and was about to pull out when I saw something that made me pause. The bathroom door opened, and the man in the flannel shirt came out. But he didn't walk toward the van. He walked toward the far end of the parking lot, into the darkness beyond the lights, and disappeared. That struck me as odd, but I didn't think too much about it. Maybe he was going to smoke, or maybe he had a vehicle parked somewhere I couldn't see. I started to drive away. Then I saw someone else. Another person, this one coming from the direction where the first man had gone. They walked across the parking lot, casual and unhurried, and went into the bathroom. I stopped my truck. Something felt wrong. Why would 2 different people be walking around in the dark at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere at 11 at night? I sat there for a minute, debating what to do. Part of me said to just leave, that it was none of my business. But another part of me was curious, and maybe a little concerned. I decided to wait and see what happened. I turned off my engine and watched. A few minutes later, the second person came out of the bathroom. They walked across the parking lot in the same direction as the first person, into the darkness, and disappeared. Then a third person appeared. Same thing, walked across the lot, went into the bathroom, came out a few minutes later, and walked into the darkness. My heart started beating faster. This wasn't normal. 3 people, all following the same pattern, all disappearing into the darkness beyond the parking lot. And that white van, still sitting there, no one around it. I grabbed my phone and turned on the camera. I wanted to record whatever happened next. I had a bad feeling about this, and I wanted evidence if something was wrong. I waited. After about 10 minutes, a 4th person appeared. This one was different, smaller, walking faster, looking around nervously. They went into the bathroom. I decided I needed to see where these people were going. I got out of my truck, keeping my phone in my hand, and walked quietly toward the edge of the parking lot where everyone had been disappearing. As I got closer, I could see a dirt path leading away from the rest stop, down a small slope into a gully. There was a faint glow of light down there, like a campfire or lanterns. I crept down the path as quietly as I could. My phone was recording, the flashlight off. As I got closer to the light, I started to hear voices. Multiple people talking, but too far away to make out what they were saying. I reached a point where I could see what was happening. In the gully, hidden from the rest stop and the highway, there was a group of maybe 10 or 12 people gathered around a campfire. They all looked rough, disheveled, like they'd been living outdoors for a while. And in the center of the group, sitting on the ground with their hands tied behind their back, was the fourth person I'd seen, the one who'd been walking nervously. My blood went cold. This wasn't a random gathering of homeless people or travelers. This was something organized, something predatory. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding. I'd seen enough. I needed to get out of there and call the police. But as I turned to leave, I stepped on a branch. It snapped, loud and sharp in the quiet night. The voices below stopped immediately. Someone shouted. I heard footsteps running up the path toward me. I ran as fast as I could, back to my truck, my phone clutched in my hand. I could hear people behind me, close, gaining ground. I reached my truck and threw myself into the cab. I started the engine, threw it into gear, and floored it out of that rest stop. In my mirror, I could see figures emerging from the darkness, standing in the parking lot, watching me go. I drove for 20 miles before I felt safe, enough to stop. I pulled over at a well-lit truck stop with lots of people around and called 911. I told them everything I'd seen. I gave them the exact location of the rest stop. I sent them the video I'd recorded on my phone, though it was dark and shaky and didn't show much. The police said they'd send someone to check it out. They called me back 2 hours later. They'd gone to the rest stop and found the white van, abandoned. They'd searched the area, including the gully, and found evidence of a campfire and signs that people had been there recently. But everyone was gone. They found one more thing. In the van, they found rope, duct tape, plastic tarps, and other items consistent with kidnapping or human trafficking. The police told me I was lucky. They said what I'd stumbled onto was likely a human trafficking operation, using isolated rest stops to move people or to hold them temporarily. They said these operations are more common than people realize, and they're getting more sophisticated. They also told me that if those people had caught me, I probably wouldn't have made it out of that gully. I gave them my full statement and the video. They said they'd be in touch if they needed more information. I never heard from them again. I still drive trucks. I still take the same routes, but I don't stop at isolated rest stops anymore. I plan my breaks around well-populated areas with lots of lights and lots of witnesses, because I know now that those empty rest stops in the middle of nowhere aren't always as empty as they seem. Sometimes they're meeting points, sometimes they're traps, and sometimes the people you see walking into the darkness don't come back out.